horse equipment is very expensive. I have had a couple of examples that actually horrified me.
When you start bringing in a business mindset and a performance mindset, you get an exponential increase in psychological stresses and pressure and time. So it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds.
Is this a good time to talk about sponsorship?
I'm trying to be diplomatic, but you know what? Let's just go for it. Gloves are off. It's the major problem is sponsorship.
A warm welcome back, and thank you all for your interest in and support of this topic, for liking, subscribing, commenting, and generally keeping this important issue alive and kicking. The landscape is definitely changing out there, and very rapidly, as many of you are talking freely about the ethics of horses in sport. The powers that be are definitely listening. Last week, we introduced this topic and provided a very detailed background. Tonight, we will cover even more background because, like any difficult subject, if you can familiarise yourself with the why, you can come up with ideas about the how. And together, we can make this happen. Once again, I'm delighted to welcome Anette Karlsson, advanced dressage rider from Sweden, who competes and trains under FEI rules, and who has a rather gifted daughter who, at only 17 years old, has just successfully entered the world of Grand Prix dressage. Bradley Whale from Ipotane Saddles, as well as being a registered human osteopath, he's also an equine osteopath and gifted saddle design and construction innovator. He comes from an engineering background and trained up to Olympic level in a range of different sports, including show jumping. He's also a clinical educator. He's a nerd of the highest order, but always follows up on his lines of inquiry with a highly applied, hands-on approach to his saddle design and his treatments. He has 3 children under 3, so we are hugely thankful to Mrs. Whale for single-handedly holding the nursery fort tonight for us. I'm a veterinary physiotherapist, graduate human sports therapist, certified saddle fitter and clinical educator, currently studying for a professional doctorate in the topic of rider posture, pain and performance, with a special focus on rider low back pain and lumbopelvic function for performance. Bradley only got halfway through his slides in the previous 2.5-hour session, and needless to say, has since added more content. So Bradley, it's over to you.
So when last time we kind of finished on AI judging, which was quite fascinating. We are actually going to be looking at the many other aspects of the equestrian industry and specifically to do with dressage. So what we are currently doing and having an issue with in the equestrian industry is what we've described as what we see as a money financial cap. So when we start looking at the higher kind of performance levels of sport, and of the equestrian industry, in order to compete at a higher and higher and a higher level, so world championship and Olympic level and so on and so forth, there is an exponential increase in financial requirement. And in order to compete at these higher equestrian levels, most individuals find it very difficult to financially afford it. For example, entrance to an international competition is £1,000, I think it is, British pounds at the moment. And I think that's going to increase again. That's just the entry fee. That doesn't include travel, stabling, food, so on and so forth. So what's happening at the moment is because most individuals can't afford it individually, what they are doing is they're now starting to move into syndication. And syndication, if you don't know what it is where you have multiple owners which essentially buy a portion of the horse and therefore finance the horse's performance and development. Now, syndication has been around, especially within the racing industry, for an exceptionally long period of time. But it is a relatively new thing in regards to the dressage world and the show jumping world and various things like that. But because of exponential rising costs, you can start to understand why syndication is starting to be encouraged. Although there is a bit of a problem with that primarily is that once you start using syndication in order to finance the horse to go to competitions and to compete and everything like that, you are essentially using the horse as a business model and as a business, which therefore means that the people who are involved are going to be looking at it through very much a business mindset and a business lens. And what we mean by that is that the individuals involved, the various kind of people involved, they see the horse develop, they see the horse grow and improve. And they may, for example, then look at it and go, right, I want to, before the horse damages itself, I want to pull my money out, which therefore can inadvertently force the sale of the horse before it has developed to its full potential. Or equally, you can also have situations where individuals are asking to go and do certain examinations or kind of wanting to go slowly, but then the syndicate, the people who have invested in the horse, are actually going, no, we want you to compete. So there becomes almost a potential for conflict between the individual rider or the welfare of the horse and the performance of the horse. And this is the problem. You can kind of understand why, when you're selling horses for thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they are worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, you can understand the need or the desire by the syndicate or various individuals who are invested within the horse to actually prove or prove the horse's worth, or in order to perform higher and higher. Now, there's been numerous individual cases where horses have been sold by the owners of the horse rather than the rider, and the rider has then subsequently lost that ride. Now, this is a problem which is starting to occur quite heavily within the equestrian industry in terms of dressage, because competitions are becoming more expensive to run, so therefore they have to raise prices. And because you're raising prices, that also then means that people psychologically are wanting to get more out of their performance. And you can start to see now that if you're talking about money, and money is a fairly large subject when you're talking to people generally, let alone within the equestrian industry, that if you're saying, right, your entry, even at low level now, is £100 or £150 or £200, all of a sudden the people who are going to those competitions in order to perform and compete, they're putting on a lot more pressure on themselves, and that subconsciously has an impact on the training, because you're putting more pressure on to perform, and you're spending a vast amount of money, and you now want to get a performance out of it. So therefore you start to see and understand how the pressure can build up in training in order to perform, and it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, that the more money you're going to spend, the more expectation you're going to get out of it, and the more expectation you're going to get out of it, the more pressure you're going to put on the horse and also yourself in order to perform. And therefore, if you are given options of trying to get ahead or using tools in order to get an appearance of a better performance or anything like that, you can see how easy it is for individuals to take those steps. It becomes a very easy, very logical process. And that is where you start kind of seeing how the industry moves, because you can't look at kind of trying to solve this problem within the equestrian industry from a singular perspective. We all have to look at it through various different lenses. So it becomes more and more difficult. And as I say, when you start bringing in a business mindset and a performance mindset, you get an exponential increase in psychological stresses and pressure and time and so on and so forth. So it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds.
So just one question and one clarification. Yeah. So at the Olympics, we can expect a dressage horse, to be well prepared, or one that is well prepared would be ready for the Dressage Olympics at about 9, and then possibly compete till about 17, 18. So a career, not including the training, of 7, 8, 9 years possibly.
Yep, potentially.
Annette, you produce your own horses, obviously not in a syndicate, but what's your view on the age that we can expect a horse to be competing at Grand Prix level?
I think 9 years old is fairly early.
Okay.
Actually, you can see they are not really that confirmed. Depends a lot on horse's maturity, how it's to train, and the skill maybe of trainer. But not below 9 years old, I think is reasonable. 7, 8 years, no way.
Yeah.
I think
so minimum age 9. Ideal 11, 12 maybe.
Ideal age. We have to start somewhere to train the horses to be in the environment. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak.
Okay. So these syndicates, they are, I think, in my experience from reading, researching, they are acquiring 3-year-olds when the young horse is old enough to have proved its potential somewhat, and then the horse goes into training for 6 plus 6, 7 years. So it's not an overnight investment. This is a considerable...
No. Syndication is not an overnight investment. Syndication is very much set with the understanding that you're going to be in there for a bit of a long time. What you've got to remember is that with syndication is that there are bi-yearly reviews. So, for example, they will typically buy a horse, or a syndicate will buy a horse at the age of 3. If it's in order to do dressage or show jumping or anything like that. If it's a racing industry or a racing syndication, it'll be a yearling or it'll be foals. So it's slightly different. But if we're going to stay specific to dressage, they would typically buy them at 3. I think it's fairly
usual to buy the horses at 2-year-old because they are broken at half.
Yeah. So it's kind of like 2, 3, they'll buy them, they'll back them. But there is a yearly review or a bi-yearly review if that horse is performing. So they will encourage people to take the horse to 5-year-old classes. And the horse is already being judged, not only by the people who are judging the horse, that's their job, but also the syndicate. Because the syndicate is then looking back and going, okay, is this horse where we want it to be for us in terms of performance in order to help us financially support and go forward? So you've got almost a double whammy of stressors going on for the people involved with the management of the horse, for the people involved who are riding it and competing it. You're suddenly not only kind of going, well, I'm actually being judged by the individual in the competition, but I also know that if I don't get a good enough result, then this horse, which I see having potential and is just a little bit slower in terms of its development, suddenly the syndicate will turn around and go, you know what, it hasn't scored enough results this year. We want to basically pass it on and get rid of it. That creates a huge amount of anxiety. And that's why I was saying is that that's where you have almost, because you've got a double whammy of stressors, you can start to understand why people then reach for training methods which are a little bit quicker in order to get the results. And that's where you can start to understand the mentality. You can start to understand the need or the want and the requirement. But you've also got, as I said, 2 different groups. One's who's trying to maintain the horse and look after its well-being, and the other one which is looking at it kind of partly from a financial backing perspective. So they're going to be looking at it through a numbers perspective, quantifiable data. And the other ones are going to be looking at it more through qualitative an aspect, i.e., how is the horse? Oh, it's a young horse. It's physically old, but it's mentally quite young. It's going to develop, but it's going to take time. We don't want that. We want a horse which is going to hit the numbers and actually make money or, actually do something. We can't just look after a horse and have it on a whim, if you see what I mean, with the potential it might. Because you've got 2 very polarizing elements, and the poor horse and the rider are kind of stuck in the middle and trying to alleviate both. this is where you start looking at the bigger issues, is that because horses are so expensive and competition sites are starting to reduce, there are less and less kind of competition sites. So you're now having to go to bigger competitions, which are having to run more classes, and it starts to become an industry orientated problem, because it's now big business. It's no longer little kind of cottage business, if you see what I mean. And I'm only talking in terms of dressage. When you start looking at other industries like point-to-pointing, which we have in the UK, and various other things, the cost of those are exponentially increasing as well because of insurance and whatnot. But they're a lot more localized, if you see what I mean, than dressage. I think there's, in certain areas, only one dressage site in the UK, in certain counties or in certain sections. I think even in Oxfordshire, which is where I am, I think there is only one dressage site, and even that is under threat of potentially disappearing, in which case then the whole of the county has no dressage sites and is actually now having to travel to other associated counties in order to get qualification. And that's just at a county level. And this is an exponential problem which we have within the industry, is there is a lot of money in the industry, but you are not kind of seeing that at the lower levels. It's not encouraging grassroots to come up through. Yeah. And what you're getting is this, and I do talk about it slightly later, is you get this almost legacy building of parents, and please don't take this the wrong way, Annette, who have ridden and who have competed at national and international level, and the people who are then coming up through are their children. So it's kept in the most polite way possible within the family. You don't have the access like to a degree you used to, especially in the UK. You don't have that access as what you did. Now it's becoming almost, it becomes almost in the family kind of, you can ride my performance horse and develop up through and so on and so forth to learn. So in order to try and reduce costs and the financial strain and stress.
Yeah, talking of costs, the other complexities are that the competition riders, the elite riders, those at the top or close to the top, they need to maintain their competition reputation so that they can be offered the best horses.
Yeah.
And then where they have a stake in that horse, perhaps, that they have to sell some good young horses to pay the bills, to keep the yard going, to pay the staff, and, as you say, pay for those competition costs. So those that are in this are in a very expensive business, which is fraught because there are animals involved. There's high risk of injury. It's not as simple as it looks at first sight.
No, not at all. So if you've got your own horses, you look after them very differently. You don't look at them via numbers, if you see what I mean. There's a lot more emotion and kind of mental thought processing which is going on.
Very personal.
Exactly. Which is very, very different to the way the kind of major industry is starting to go.
Yeah, yes it is.
So this ties in with the finances, is we talk about marketing, and the reasons why I'm saying about marketing is it's all under that kind of umbrella term of products, because within the industry, we as individuals seem to be more obsessed with brands rather than the objective performance. And you can hear that in how we talk about products. And I'm for example, going to use saddles as an example, is that we as an industry or as individuals, we become very brand orientated, and we like a brand and we stick with it. We don't necessarily will look at a product through its performance capabilities. Now, the reasons why I say this is because if you picked up two magazines, let's just say Horse and Hound or Horse Weekly or whatever you want to use, and you picked up Cycling Weekly or whatever cycling magazine you used. So one is an industry which is more orientated towards a female kind of industry, because let's be honest, there are 80% of the industry is female. 20% is more male orientated. And then you look at cycling, which is much heavier weighted towards male, and how they advertise their products, how they talk about their products are structured in a very, very different way. So, for example, cycling will look at objective measurements, weight, speed. It will talk about materials used, so on and so forth. The products which are advertised and also talked about within Horse and Hound or Horse Weekly are talking about the more aesthetic components in terms of what kind of colors of leather you can get a product in, or what kind of beading you can get, or piping, or so on and so forth. So that is because the orientation of the industry. That is not a bias in any way, shape, or form. But the problem is that what you've got to remember is that companies know this and they market accordingly. There is no point going to a female industry and trying to provide cold hard numbers, because the cold hard numbers is going to go over the top of the head. Equally, there's no point going to a male orientated industry like cycling or anything like that and going, oh, look at the pretty colors, because the cyclists are going to turn around and go, yeah, how much does the bike weigh, and how much can I do this, and how much can I do that? It's a very different thing. So the difficulty is you need, if you want to make a change with the finances and for people to be more kind of aware of the benefits of products and versus brands, is that we have to move away from brands and move towards products and as a separate entity. I treat clients where, for example, they've got a new horse and they go, oh, well, I love Thorogood's, and I'm using Thorogood's as an example, so it's not kind of bias or anything like that, but they go, I love Thorogood saddles, they work for me as a rider. And you sit there and go, unfortunately, this horse is a very different shape to your last horse. But they're like, well, I'll just go to the brand to go and get me another saddle. And yes, they may be able to cater for that individual, but listen to the mentality is that I like that product, I'm sticking to that product. It's not, okay, let's look at the options which are actually going to fit the horse. There is an element of, I know this product, therefore I will ownership of it and I will put it onto the horse. And that is a problem. But it is a problem if you want to create change, if you see what I mean. So that needs greater conversations within the industry as well, in order to kind of go, right, how do we approach this? Because, you know, there are companies which are very, very successful out of brand loyalty alone, not necessarily their performance of products. Their performance of products may be very, very good, but their proportion of brand loyalty and branding and marketing is exponentially cleverer and much more efficient than necessarily the performance of their products.
Is this a good time to talk about sponsorship, or have you got a slide?
No, you can talk about sponsorship as well, because that is, you know, but you've certainly gone right into it there, which is the sponsorship is the problem. I was trying to be diplomatic, but you know what, let's just go for it. Yeah, so the problem is okay, gloves are off. It's the major problem is sponsorship, because all of a sudden you've got people who are sponsored by products and they are not necessarily the right product for that individual, but what happens is that they're getting paid by the company a lot of money in order to sell the product, and it is part and parcel of the industry. You're not going to stop it. It is a major problem because it influences the next generation. It influences everybody else. I know products which didn't work, but they had such a movement behind them in terms of branding and marketing that they were provided for free to individuals and they were given money and various things like that. But the products didn't work. They just categorically did not do what they said they could do.
Oh.
But because they were so well branded, they were so well marketed, that they ended up outselling near enough every product on the market. And it wasn't because the product was good. You know, literally a year later, everybody was a little bit upset because they were throwing all the products away because they didn't work. But they had been duped into it because of marketing and sponsorship. And that's the problem. If they're obsessed with brands, they're not obsessed with the actual products.
Of course, people are comfortable with what they know, product
Exactly.
and product line, and they know what to expect. So that makes a difference for many riders in the choice of equipment.
And what I've seen is young riders, for example, hacking out around the village in their close contact show jumping saddles, which are only meant for possibly the show jumping ring and not for training the horse in, possibly. So as long as these young riders see their heroes riding in a particular brand, they want that saddle and they expect to be able to go out hacking in it.
Yeah, this is one of my personal bugbears is, and I see this because I have to, you remember, I'm a human therapist. I also treat high performance individuals. I treat cyclists, I treat athletes, musicians, so on and so forth. I have sat down with enough cyclists, and some which are very well known within kind of the wider community, and they laugh when I talk to them about saddles for horses, because they're like, I have one bike which I only use for competitions. That is it.
Yeah.
It weighs half a gram in terms of thing. But there's no way I can ride my bike out on the road and hit a pothole because the frame will smash. The frame is made of such precision carbon fiber that it is only used on the racing track. And I'm sat there going, yeah, you know, we have high performance saddles, which then riders are expecting to not only compete at, you know, jumping or doing dressage at a very high level, they're also then expecting it to ride in that product every single day, for it to last, for it to kind of look attractive, for almost to do too much.
Yeah.
And the problem is you're sat there, and he was just like, he has bikes which are 10 grand each, and he's like, I've got 16 of them. Like some are old racing bikes from Olympics where he's got medals and he keeps them. You know, they're beautiful pieces of art. But he also is like, I have 5 or 6 bikes which I use in terms of training. I've got my heavyweight outdoor endurance bike, which is heavy and it's sluggish. It's for my training in the winter. I've then got my kind of turbo bike, which I'll sit on the turbo and train and da-da-da-da-da. Then he's like, I've got my 18 grand bike, which is a sliver of a thing you can pick up on your finger. He's like, I only use this potentially 2 or 3 times a year. That is it. And you're sat there going, yes, this is the problem, is especially in saddles, we expect to buy a product and we expect it to not only be high performance, but also then have longevity. And the problem is there's so much difficulty with doing that, because you've got to look at materials. If you want a product which is going to last, then the materials have to be heavier and denser because they've got to last. Well, that reduces the performance of the product because now you've added weight. And you sat there kind of going, this is all counterintuitive. But again, it's when we are looking at individuals, high performance individuals, especially in the equestrian industry, they are sponsored by a product and they are forced to use that product in order to receive money. And this goes back to what I was saying about finances. If you are competing multiple times in a year and every major competition is costing you £1,000 just for the entrance fee, then you've got travel either abroad or internal. You've got food, you've got overnight stays. That's money's got to come from somewhere. Yeah. So all of a sudden you get a sponsorship deal and you go, right, I've got sponsored by this company. They're going to give me 5 grand, 10 grand, 15, however much. And I've just got to push their products once a month or once every week or something like that. And I've just got to ride in the product or I've got to perform in the product and have it on show. It may not work for my horse. You see the morality which comes in is like, does this product actually work for my horse, or am I doing this just to finance it, basically? And that's where you're in this trouble.
Yeah, and it also blocks other manufacturers from getting near that horse and rider combination, which have basically been ring fenced by a sponsor. So that I've heard of a situation where somebody's gone in and tried another type of saddle, which is fitted in a certain way, because all brands are not fitted the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody's come in with the sponsored saddle and said, hey, no, that doesn't fit at all. Go away. This horse is sticking with this brand.
Yeah.
So it is a problem. And it's no secret that many riders who ride in sponsored saddles, that is not their number one choice. I mean, sometimes it is, but
yeah.
if it's not their number one choice, they won't train in that saddle. And unfortunately, the best saddle, if they're keeping it for training, is not seeing the light of day in competitions.
That's where, for example, in saddles, you have a situation where you'll have your major training saddle, which might be whatever.
Yeah.
And then for essentially 15 minutes of a competition, you're riding in a saddle which is potentially doesn't fit, or it has a different balance point, or various things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't matter because it's only for a short period of time. But I'm still ticking my sponsorship deal. I'm still ticking my brand deal. And as I said, you hit this morality issue, and it's something which you're not going to stop. You can't stop it. It exists, and it's only potentially going to get worse unless there are things put in place to limit it.
Yeah.
Many other industries, such as basketball or football and various things like that, they have things in place to stop this. But interestingly, the equestrian industry doesn't. We have to abide by the generalistic rules of sponsorship and marketing and branding. But as an individual sport, we don't actually have much in terms of sport sponsorship protection. So, for example, in certain, like football, for example, and especially on Instagram or anything like that, if you're selling a product or you're known to be marketing or sponsoring, being sponsored by a product, you have to state that clearly. That was put in by Instagram. That wasn't put in by individuals or individual industries. And that's where the problems occur. Because you've got people who are influenced by that, who suddenly sit there and go, right, okay, I've got to have X product. I've got to have X product. I've got to have X product because so-and-so uses it or anything like that. And there's lots of ways around it as well. I know enough people who basically get around their marketing or their branding and their sponsorship deals and various things like that. But isn't it a problem within the industry, which has to be addressed to a degree? I wouldn't say it's the biggest problem in the industry, but it is something which has to be talked about and has to be we have to have conversations with.
And just to mention Nick Skelton at the Olympics, he used his 40-year-old saddle.
Yeah.
He was comfortable in, and he would not change. I mean, he wouldn't even change the model, or he kept that saddle, which was perfect for him.
Yeah.
So he wasn't going to be convinced that he needed to change at all.
No, not at all. But I don't know what it's like in Sweden with Anette in terms of sponsorship or anything like that. I don't know the rules and the regulations in terms of your industry over there. And whether that's any...
but I don't think it's that usual for people to switch saddles. Like, I haven't encountered anyone yet doing that. Okay. So it's kind of surprising to hear.
Yeah, very interesting what's happening.
But very often with sponsorship here, one common factor is that you're sponsored with a part of the equipment, so maybe 50% discount or something. It's most usual.
Yeah, sponsorship deals can range from giving direct payments to percentages off to percentages of sales if using certain codes or various things like that. So there are sponsorships so that if you're sponsored and you say, right, okay, use, for example, gift one when you go and buy the product and you'll get 10% off. That also means that individual is also then getting 5% given back to them as a company gift, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's quite common.
But maybe that's why it's not that common to switch like that, between saddles and stuff, because
Yeah.
if you're going to buy half the saddle anyway.
One of the other issues with, again, this is still under the umbrella term of products, is equipment standards. And this is a big bugbear, which anybody who knows me or anything like that, I sincerely apologize, I'm going to bang a drum, is equipment standards. And especially within the saddle industry. Saddlery is unregulated. There is no minimum standard of manufacture of safety of standards within saddles. For example, the girth. The girth is designed to hold the saddle in position, and arguably, possibly one of the most important bits of safety equipment regarding saddles. There are no minimum standards of how much force that girth has to hold before it breaks. Nothing. So let's consider a scenario where a child riding a horse and the girth snaps. The child falls off and is paralyzed. The girth is clearly at fault because the girth has snapped, but because there are no standards to measure against, there is minimal accountability. That is one scenario. If I told you that you had a child and you had to put it in a car seat in your car and had to put some straps over it to hold it in place, I would guarantee you will want to make sure that that product is safety standard. It has been tested. There are minimum safety equipment, the standards which is hit. There are regulations, so on and so forth. But yet we go into the industry as saddlery or anything like that. There is nothing. We have more regulations for hats than we do girths. To me, that is pretty poor. And that's why I get really irate, because I talk about standardization and everyone thinks it's a hoity-toity thing. And I'm like, no. Even just something like girth straps on a saddle. We know they're made of leather, generalistically, and sometimes they can have polyethylene webbing on the back to make them sturdier and so on and so forth. That's absolutely fine. But you sit there and go, okay, where's the standards? Where is the regulation which actually states it has to cope with this amount of stretch force going on? It doesn't matter if it's going to be tonnage. It doesn't matter if it's going to be 2 tons before it snaps. We have something.
Yeah.
We need something. We need, like, if you're trying to protect the industry, and you've got to remember is that we're having the conversation because the industry needs a solution, or it needs to be seen to be doing a solution in some way, shape, or form. Putting in a safety equipment standard is relatively easy. You know, and it's something which we can all do, and just kind of hit a regulation. Okay, my girth straps have to cope with a certain amount of stretch force or various things like that, and we can build on that. But it's quite scary when you consider that there is nothing in terms of safety equipment. Bridles are a little bit better with the FEI. They at least get involved with the FEI, or the FEI kind of dictate. Don't get me wrong, there's also problems with how the FEI talk and kind of suddenly ban products, and it kind of catches a lot of companies out of the blue because they don't really have a lot of cross communication going on. But at least the FEI do turn around and go, right, this product is no longer regulatory. It's not because of safety. The FEI haven't dictated any safety standards. They've just said, look, this product is no longer kind of allowable. You know, I'm talking about actually turning around and going, okay, let's have some health and safety regulations, not just, okay, let's just remove that product. It's going, okay, does your product hit this safety standard? If it hits that safety standard, yes, right, that's minimum requirement. Then it's that next stage of, can it be used at this level of competition?
And then there are also ethical standards for the horses. So you talk about bits.
Yeah.
So that needs to be looked at. We do need ethical comfort standards for the horse. Tightening of the girth. So these days, compared with several decades ago, girths are being tightened severely.
Yeah, that's also if you really so yes, but there are multiple reasons why that is occurring.
Okay.
And that's partly because of biomechanics.
Yeah.
That's partly because of how products are manufactured and designed. So they're designed slightly differently. So you also have this weird human psychology that we've got to almost over tighten the girth to feel secure. And the difficulty is actually security doesn't come from the saddle. The security comes from your innate ability to ride, your own course balance, your own core stability. But that has happened because we have, in saddlery, we have got over involved. We have tried bigger and bigger blocks to try and position the rider in the right position. Yes. But because you're positioning the rider in bigger and bigger blocks, you are also removing the rider's ability to self-balance and self-control. So by doing the right thing in one industry, you've actually done the wrong thing in another industry.
Yeah.
Because people have got weaker. And you've also got to remember is that as a generation, people are also getting weaker as we get older. And I'm talking generationally. We do less and less exercise. So people in the 1950s and the 1960s, they ate a lot more, they burnt off a lot more calories because they were doing things much more physically. Now we eat food which is better quality, but we do less. So we then get bigger, and I mean more overweight. We're not doing the mileage in terms of walking and whatnot. You quite often see people just drive their car, not even half a mile to go and get kind of food from a petrol station or little corner shop or anything like that. So this
they can use an app.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's what I mean is you've got this kind of reduction of people movement, and because they're not moving as much, they're not so physically strong, they're not so physically fit, and because they're not so physically fit, they feel more unstable. So because they feel more unstable, they have to tighten the girth to make themselves feel secure, when actually security comes from core stability.
That's really interesting, because I had no idea why they were doing it. No idea at all.
It's also, as I said, it's multifactorial. It's also because of saddle design. It's also because of girth designs. It's also because of horses' shape changes. They've changed shape quite dramatically in terms of their rib cage structure and the hyper movement of the shoulder. Like all of these factors then impact like girthing to a massive degree. Like I can talk about, because I've just finished doing girthing and doing my own research on girthing, I can talk about girth for hours and all the various factors which are involved in it, because it's a very complex thing. I would argue personally that girths are more complex than saddles, because at least with saddles we have a working model of how the back moves. We don't have a working model of how the rib cage moves and how the thorax moves and how the sternum moves and articulates, and all we have nothing. So quite literally girth designers are shooting in the dark and trying to solve issues often which are caused by saddles, and it's a toing and froing, and it's unbelievably more complex. At least with saddles you can, that is the primary thing which most people are looking for. They're looking for a saddle, and you can get quite easy feedback quite quickly from horse and rider via the saddle. Via a girth and getting feedback there's a little bit more of a lag. But I will digress if I go into girths a lot more, because there's a lot of biomechanics which are not even talked about in terms of girth.
Yeah. I think you get on to tack later, so we'll come back to that. Just very quickly, there is a British standard for British trees.
Yes.
Is that so that is that standard focused on them not breaking?
No, that's not a safety standard.
What is that standard for trees?
So that is a standard of certain thicknesses when you're using certain materials. So there's no safety legislation in terms of at what point does it break or fracture or anything like that. It is just what is the thickness of the materials which you're using in order to make it, and that's your British standard. And it's not even legally enforceable, and that's the really scary part.
So in terms of, just rounding up very quickly on this, in terms of protecting sport horses, dressage horses, what needs to happen in terms of equipment standards? What improvements do we need to see?
So, for example, if you had equipment standards in terms of manufacture and safety, all of a sudden you are forcing an industry to start spending more money on research and actually doing research onto protecting horses. What is the minimum allowable pressure onto a horse's back?
Okay.
What is a minimum allowable pressure on a girth? So you've not only got that, but you've equally also got ways to then protect the manufacturer, because then a manufacturer can easily work out whether their product went wrong or there was a problem with fitting.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have equipment standards, you can turn the manufacturer, or anybody, an independent body, can come in and go, okay, is this a problem with the manufacturer? Was it made wrong or inaccurately? And that is trackable. If it wasn't made wrong or inaccurately, okay, was it fitted inaccurately? Again, that is, you then have a tried and tested method of accountability, because you can say, right, okay, what standards was that practitioner working at? What was their methodology of fitting, so on and so forth. And I'm using saddles as an example. But what you also then get, so you're not only protected the manufacturer, you've also then protected the fitter. And then thirdly, you are then protecting the customer, because you can then turn around and go, well, actually the fitting was correct, or the manufacturer was correct. Okay, what was the aftercare like in terms of, did the customer ride in a wet saddle and it got ripped and torn, or it's been trodden on, or anything like that? And then you have trackability throughout the whole length of life of the product. And you've got to remember is that if the product is made and there is forced equipment standards, that means that then the manufacturer takes photographs. They will record any fault with the product. They may get a tree, like a wooden tree, and go, oh, it's slightly twisted. Okay, that's not good enough. Okay, right, there you go. Hand it back to the tree manufacturer. That's not good enough for my standards. Okay. But they are then more likely to take photographs to log all of those minutiae details which are inaccurate in order to protect themselves. The same thing with the fitter. The fitter is then going to take a product and then rigorously go through the product and go, right, okay, that leather is positioned slightly out of line. Is that within tolerance? Is that not within tolerance? Suddenly the standards just step up, because in essence, nobody wants to be caught with their trousers down. And I mean that in the most polite way possible. Then, you go to the customer. The customer can then check the product and whether they are happy with it. So all of a sudden, the whole lifespan of the product improves, and the expectation of it. And because you're putting your reputation on the line or anything like that, all of a sudden you're sat there, and it means that companies are then forcing to go, right, okay, we're going to make a product to this standard in order to protect ourselves.
And I think horse equipment is very expensive equipment.
Yeah.
And I have had a couple of examples that actually horrified me. And I'm talking about the more expensive brands.
Yep.
One dressage saddle that I bought new, and when the color drops off in the first week and you paid 45,000 Swedish crowns, you're not really that happy as a customer. And I was without saddle for 6 months. I never got a new. In the end, I got my money back so I could buy another saddle. And that was the case also with another of these big brands. It was crooked, really crooked. Like one of the stirrup bars was 1.5 centimeters lower than the other. That's not acceptable. That's horrifying. I can't ride in that.
Yeah.
I mean, my horse just pulled it once, and I bought that saddle too, new. And I think not just we need rules for what's acceptable or not, because the brand tried to say that was in acceptable range. Of course, it wasn't just the stirrup bar; the entire tree was shifted.
Yeah, twisted.
And I think also the time they can take to fix something on a guarantee should be, 6 months. It's not,
Nope.
that doesn't work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are companies out there which do write in at their contract with you that they will replace a product within a certain amount of time. I know certain companies in the UK that you go to them with a product and they just go, yep, absolutely fine, exchange, no problem. Their aftercare system is phenomenal. They're fantastic. I equally know companies which turn around and go 6 months minimum. And you sat there kind of going, no, that's not good enough. And again, when you have standards, equipment standards, you are forcing an industry to change externally. That's an external force which is saying, okay, you've got to up your game. But what you've got to remember is saddlery is still deemed as a craft.
Yes.
It is not deemed as a accurate manufacturing process. It is deemed a craft. And there are certain legal leniencies which are given for that.
Yes.
And sorry, although they do need to be constructed robustly, quite often they last 2 or 3 generations. So, unlike a washing machine that we can expect to last for 5-7 years, saddles.
Well, that is, I'm going to say this in a horrible way, that is designed obsolescence. So they do that deliberately because there is more money in forcing customers to buy a newer product because the company then gets a bigger payout. There is no money for a saddle company in terms of retrofitting a product and rehabilitation products. There's no money in it because a saddle company is orientated around sales. So you've always got to be selling the next product. Any product which has a long-term lifestyle, it might be very good for the customer, but it's really bad business for a saddle company. And in order to do that, you've got to have a totally different orientation of how you want to run a saddle company. And then it is, we don't do that anymore. You've got to buy the new product. It's a business model. As I say, you're sat there with an industry which is in conflict because it's on the surface designed for the welfare of the horse, but actually no, it's got to earn money. It's got to be a business, and those two are at loggerheads. I had a big issue with that in terms of coming into saddlery and how to set up an ethical mindset, an ethical model on how to build products and have longevity and support people in changes and so on and so forth, but equally not sit there and go, right, you've got to buy the next new product, the next new product, the next new product.
I think then what we need is more people, and this is getting better, but more riders, coaches, therapists actually checking these saddles.
Yeah, for example, like girth straps. This is the one thing which always funny when I go to do a saddle fitting or kind of to teach or anything like that is girth straps are the wrong way round. So and this is quite comical. So I'll go and have a look at your saddles, and you'll look at the girth straps, and you'll see the lovely pretty side on the outside. Yeah. Okay. But when you pull that girth strap up, you're compressing the fibers, or the pretty side. You're compressing it. Okay. Where the cell fibers on the leather are actually really closely packed. Okay. And then if you look on the rough side, the cellular fibers are actually quite loose. So when you do the girth strap up, you're stretching and separating the cellular fibers on the rough side. Yeah? So you should have the girth strap the other way round. So the rough side on the outside.
Yeah.
And the smooth or the pretty side on the inside. So that when you pull the girth strap up, you're closing the rough side where they have the looser cellular fibers.
Yeah.
They then close together and they won't rip and tear apart, because on the pretty side, the cellular fibers are a lot closer together and more densely packed, and they can cope with that. But if you look at every saddle, they don't do the girth straps that way round. They only do it with the pretty side on the outside. And again, that goes back to brands, aesthetics, marketing, because it's more about the aesthetics. It's not about the performance of the materials.
Okay.
You see, it then starts becoming full circle. We start looking at kind of, you've actually made this decision because of the aesthetics, not because it's the best material or it's the best way to utilize that material that way around. Companies which have now started to switch and move their girth straps the other way round in order to basically prolong the longevity of the girth straps. But that's just one example, which we have in Salary.
But Western people have discovered the rough side out is good.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing, is that we do things by rote, and we don't actually understand the reasons why we've done certain things. And a lot of it is because of aesthetics, because it looks prettier rather than that's the performance piece.
And before we leave this topic of equipment standards, something that is a major concern, which we have talked about before in other webinars, how the flocking performs. So we are getting progressively heavier, and yet the flocking, there doesn't seem to be any science to that flocking supporting that weight of rider, so that the flocking type is prescribed for the weight of the rider, so that it protects the horse and also the rider.
Yeah, and that's why I say is we don't have any of these standards. We just willy-nilly shove more flocking in. Just okay.
So we definitely need to look at equipment standards if we're going to really protect these sport horses and improve performance, and perhaps remove.
I sat down with, again, I'm not trying to name drop or anything, but I sat down with some clients of mine who were Formula One orientated. You know, they work in Formula One, and they've known that I've been fiddling and playing with saddles for a number of years. And they said, okay, so what are the rules and the regulations which you're trying to work within? And I said, there's none. And they just laughed. They were like, no, seriously, what's the rules? I said, no, there are none. And they said, well, how do you innovate? Where do you go? You know, because your options are too big. That is an industry which is so hyper regulated. And it's actually weird because they're like, no, we need the rules because then we can think outside of the rules. If there's no rules, we can go in every direction and we won't innovate. You know, we'll just kind of do little bits of innovation. When you have rules and structure, suddenly you get comparison, and you have measurable distance. You go, oh right, okay, that product can outperform that product by this amount. How did they do it? So you can then break down other products and figure out how they've improved their product. When you don't have rules, nobody does that. No, like you can expand in every direction to improve your product, and what happens is actually you don't expand in any direction, you just do little bits. So you need the rules and the regulations, you need the standards, because then all of a sudden companies then become competitive, because they suddenly, if you had something like the health and safety standards of NCAP safety rating, which we have in cars, where did your car get at in the NCAP safety rating compared to this? Like, is it 5-star? Is it a 5.5? Is it a 6? Is it a 7? Like, what did you get? Suddenly saddle companies could do that, and also you could grade it. That's the beauty about it. Like, I sat down and I worked it all out so that you could have different grades of performance products for different levels. And the beauty about that means, and this is a business thing, is that because you suddenly grade everything, in order to compete at a higher level, you need a different grade product.
Yeah.
Oh, hey ho, you've just sold another product because you've encouraged somebody to perform better. Therefore, they need a better grade product. And you actually sit there and go, there's a business model there for the industry to actually not only support customers, support horses, support the industry, but also to then protect themselves, protect the industry, I'm that level of nerd that I've just done this all off my own back, because it's there's so much potential there for the industry to go forward and protect itself and protect customers and protect horses, and also make a lot of money. And that's the irony, is you sit there with saddle companies going, you could earn a lot of money, but we've always done it like this. We don't want to change.
And also, I think we tend to accept that riders will fall off, and it will either be the rider's fault or the horse's fault. We also accept that learning to ride a horse takes years, and that you may never progress beyond novice level. And we don't really look at why. Huge, massive thanks to Anette and Bradley. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.